The alley stretched narrow and silent behind the glowing lights of the Manhattan bar. Garbage cans lined the brick wall's shadows, pooling where the street lamps could not reach. The muffled music of laughter and jazz still slipped through the back door, but here the sound was warped hollow, as if the city had chosen to abandon this place. Elena Marquez stumbled out into the night. She was 25, her brown eyes dulled by exhaustion, more than alcohol, but her steps uneven enough to betray the drinks she had forced down earlier. She had not wanted to drink, but she had needed to. It was the only way she could silence, even for a little while, the worry that gnawed her from the inside. Her mother's illness, the hospital bills that grew each month, the stack of envelopes marked overdue, and above all, her 10-year-old brother Mateo, waiting at home with a backpack half his size, and eyes that still held too much hope. She pressed a hand to the side of the building, steadying herself. The cold brick scraped her palm, reminding her that she was still awake, and this was still her life. The wind carried the faint scent of fried food, mixed with gasoline, the smell of the city that never stopped demanding. Elena pulled her thin coat tighter, wishing she could vanish into the night and leave behind the weight that dragged her down every waking hour. The sound of footsteps broke the fragile moment. She turned and saw them, 3 men's shoulders swaying with drink laughter, spilling from their mouths with the sharpness of broken glass. Their eyes glistened in the dim light, fixed on her in a way that made her stomach clench. She knew this look. She had seen it in corners of bars and subway cars after midnight. The look of men who saw vulnerability and mistook it for invitation. "Well, look what we have here." One of them slurred his grin, wide and ugly. He stepped closer, the others following like a pack of wolves closing in. Pretty girl out here all alone. Elena's heart pounded. She took a step back, but the wall pressed cold against her spine. Her voice caught in her throat. She wanted to shout, but the sound would never reach the crowded street in front. Inside the bar, the music drowned everything. She tried to steady her breath, to appear stronger than she felt, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. The first man lifted his hand toward her cheek. Elena flinched, pressing herself against the wall, but there was nowhere to go. The second man chuckled, muttering something vile to his friend, and the third blocked the narrow exit of the alley. The moment stretched long, heavy with dread. The city seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then headlights cut across the alley. A sleek black car slid to a halt near the mouth of the passage, its engine purring low and expensive. The sudden glare froze the men in place, their laughter stuttering into silence. The car door opened. A man stepped out tall, sharply dressed, his presence filling the alley, as if the air itself had shifted to accommodate him. His suit was immaculate, dark fabric catching faint glimmers of the streetlight. His expression was unreadable, eyes cold jaw, set with calm authority. The men glanced at one another uncertain, but their drunken bravado held them still. Elena stared. She had seen his face before, though never this close. Newspapers called him the ruthless king of Wall Street. Magazines printed his photographs beneath headlines that praised his brilliance and cursed his cruelty. Damian Cross, 38 years old. A billionaire who had risen from nowhere to dominate empires of finance. People whispered about his heartless strategies, about fortunes crushed under his decisions. They called him the cold billionaire, a man carved of ice and ambition. But in that alley, Damien moved with a precision that had nothing to do with boardrooms. The first man lunged forward, perhaps to shove him, perhaps to prove he was not afraid. Damien's hand snapped out, seizing the wrist midair, twisting with such speed that the man dropped to his knees, gasping. Without breaking stride, Damien shoved him aside, his body folding as if every bone had lost its strength. The second man cursed and swung wildly. Damien stepped inside the arc of the fist, his elbow driving into the man's sternum. Air burst from the attacker's lungs in a sharp wheeze before Damien pivoted, guiding him face first into the brick wall. The sound of impact echoed through the alley, then silence. The third man hesitated, glancing at his fallen companions. For a heartbeat, he considered fleeing, but pride or stupidity pushed him forward. He reached into his coat, as if to pull something sharp. Damien was already there, his arm striking the man's, sending whatever weapon he carried clattering to the ground. A swift kick swept the man's legs, and he collapsed groaning. The entire fight lasted less than 10 seconds. Elena stood frozen, her breath coming fast, her chest rising and falling with panic that could not decide if it should settle into relief or fear. Damien turned toward her. His eyes met hers, and she saw no anger there, no heat of violence, only calm control, as if he had merely adjusted the position of a painting on a wall. He straightened his jacket, glanced once at the unconscious men, and then looked at her again. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, even carrying the weight of a man accustomed to command. Elena shook her head slowly, though her body trembled. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but words tangled behind her lips. Damien studied her for another moment, his gaze cool but not unkind. Then, as if nothing remarkable had happened, he stepped past her, returning to the car. He paused only once, his hand on the door handle, eyes lifting toward the night sky as though searching for something invisible. Then he slipped inside. The car pulled away, leaving only the fading echo of its engine and the 3 men groaning on the ground. Elena pressed her back against the wall, her knees weak. The city's noise returned slowly, cars honking in the distance, laughter spilling from the bar's back door. But everything around her felt different, as if reality had shifted in the space of a single minute. The headlines had always described Damien Cross as a man of steel and numbers, untouchable and cold. Yet the man who had stood before her, who had dismantled 3 attackers with effortless skill, did not seem like a distant figure from a magazine. He seemed dangerous, yes, but also human. Elena wrapped her coat around herself and tried to breathe. Her mind replayed the moment he had looked at her steady and calm, as if he had seen through the layers of her fear into something deeper. She whispered into the night, not sure why she said it at all. Why would a man like him stop for someone like me? The question lingered as the city swallowed the alley once more. Damien Cross had been born into nothing, and nothing had nearly swallowed him whole. The Bronx had been his first battlefield, its cracked sidewalks and flickering street lamps shaping the boy, who learned quickly that hunger did not wait and safety never lasted. His father had disappeared before Damien could remember his face, and his mother worked long hours cleaning apartments that smelled of perfumes she would never afford. By the time Damien was 12, she too was gone, taken by an illness that ignored her quiet prayers. He wandered streets, sleeping on rooftops, fighting boys bigger than him for scraps. There was no savior, no guardian. What he had, he forged. He found a dingy gym that smelled of sweat and rust, where an old trainer let him sweep floors in exchange for lessons in boxing. His fists became his defense, his discipline, his only promise that he would not be broken. As the years passed, he traded fists for numbers, discovering a sharper weapon. He worked nights in bodegas, studied financial papers he found in trash bins, memorized charts he did not fully understand, until he made them his language. By 20, he had scraped together a small stake in the market. By 25, he had multiplied it, clawing past men who had laughed at his second-hand suits. Now at 38, he commanded empires from glass towers, his name whispered with awe and fear. Yet those who met his gaze called him the cold billionaire, because he did not forgive, did not hesitate, and did not reveal. They did not know that behind the armor was the echo of a woman who had once made him believe he could be more. Her name was Isabel. They had met when Damien was just beginning to climb his world, still fragile. She had seen not just the ruthless fire, but the boy who wanted a home. For a few years she was his light. Then one winter evening, as their car slid across black ice on a deserted highway, she was taken from him in a twist of metal and glass. He walked away with scars on his arms and a colder scar inside. Since that night, he had buried the part of himself that hoped building walls of steel and fortune. Damien trusted only control, and control meant never caring too much. Elena Marquez's life was different, but no less shaped by loss. Her father had been a construction worker, broad-shouldered and proud, until the day a scaffolding collapsed and left him crushed beneath the weight of his labor. She had been 9 when it happened. Her mother carried the burden of 2 working late shifts in laundromats, her hands red and raw from detergent. Elena excelled in school, dreaming of college of law perhaps, of a future where she could protect her family from the cruelties of the world. But dreams could not pay medical bills. When her mother was diagnosed with a chronic illness that weakened her lungs and left her coughing through nights, Elena abandoned her scholarships to take care of her. At 15, she became second mother to Mateo, who was only 5 then a boy, with dark curls and boundless questions. She worked every job she could find, waitress, cashier, bartender. She learned to smile at rude customers to stay quiet, and when men spoke down to her, to survive one exhausting day at a time. By 25, she lived in a cramped apartment with peeling paint, tending to her mother's fragile health, keeping Mateo in school, hiding from him the overdue notices she shoved into a drawer. The world looked at her and saw a girl on the edge of breaking. Inside she was steel, but steel bent alone grows tired. Where Damien had chosen ice, Elena had chosen fire, pushing forward with stubborn will, even when the odds mocked her. On that night in the alley, 2 paths carved by different wars crossed. Damien carried wealth beyond measure, yet locked himself in solitude. Elena carried nothing but responsibilities, yet still clung to the hope of something better for Mateo. Both bore scars, both had built walls. Neither believed they deserved rescue. That was why the moment his eyes met hers after the fight lingered. He had intended to walk away, as he always did, leaving behind whatever chaos the world spilled. She had intended to shrink into herself, to forget another night of danger. Yet something flickered in the silence between them. For Damien, it was recognition of a struggle. He once knew a shadow of the boy who fought in alleys just like this. For Elena, it was the shock of being seen by someone who usually looked down from towers of glass. Their stories were different, but the same truth bound them. The world had taken too much too soon and left them fighting in opposite directions. What neither knew that night was how much their lives were about to entwine, how past wounds would collide with present dangers, and how healing could be found in places neither expected. Damien had not planned to see her again. In his world, encounters were transactions, and transactions ended when the balance was paid. He had stepped into that alley only because instinct demanded he not ignore the wrong before him, and then he had left because detachment was survival. Yet the memory lingered like a thorn under skin, and 2 nights later his car slowed once more near the same bar. Through tinted glass he saw her again, shoulders bent under the weight of fatigue, as she carried trays wiping tables with practiced endurance. He told himself it was curiosity, not concern, but when a group of rowdy men grew too loud, he stepped inside his presence, bending the room into uneasy silence. Elena noticed him immediately. She froze with a glass in her hand, nearly dropping it. Of all the people she expected to walk through those doors, Damien Cross was last. He ordered water, nothing more, and sat in the corner where he could watch without being watched. When her shift ended, he was waiting outside. "You should not keep working here," he said, his tone flat, the voice of command. "It is not safe." Elena bristled. "And what would you know about safe for people like me?" He regarded her with that same unreadable expression. "I know enough. I can arrange something better." She shook her head chin high despite exhaustion. "I do not need charity from a billionaire who thinks he can fix people with money." He almost smiled but did not. "Then prove you do not need it. Just stay alive long enough to show me." He walked away, leaving her trembling with anger she did not understand. Days later, the world forced her hand. Her mother collapsed at home, lungs refusing to draw enough air. Elena rushed her to the hospital, the bills piling like mountains, before she even spoke to a doctor. In the chaos, she noticed the charges already covered. Her mother transferred to a better ward. She demanded answers until the nurse handed her a card. Cross Industries, paid in full. Fury and relief battled inside her. She hated the thought of debt, but when she returned to the waiting room, Damien was there, his gaze steady. "You will not repay me with gratitude," he said before she could speak. "You will repay me with your time. Come work for me." She wanted to refuse to scream at him, but her mother's fragile breaths reminded her she had no choice. The next week she found herself in the glass tower of his empire, standing among assistants who looked at her second-hand clothes with thinly veiled contempt. Damien did not introduce her as charity. He gave her a desk, a list of tasks, and the same cold expectation he gave everyone else. She expected humiliation. Instead, she discovered he watched everything, even the details others missed. When one colleague tried to shove extra work onto her, Damien appeared without warning and returned the files to their owner with a single glance that burned like frost. Elena realized then he had not brought her here to pity her. He had brought her because he saw something useful. One evening she stayed late, sorting endless contracts. Through the glass wall, she noticed light in his office, though the floor was nearly empty. She stepped closer and found him sitting alone, tie undone, a single photograph on the desk before him. The woman in the picture smiled brightly, her hand resting on Damien's arm. Elena recognized the tenderness in his eyes as he stared at it, a tenderness buried beneath layers of ice. She hesitated, but he spoke without looking up. I thought money could buy safety. I thought if I built walls high enough, nothing could touch us. I was wrong. She is gone. His voice was quiet, stripped of armor. Elena felt her chest tighten. She told him then about her father, about watching her mother break her body to keep them alive, about little Matteo, asking questions she could never answer. The words spilled not because she trusted him, but because in that dim office she saw someone who understood. He finally turned to her, the weight of years in his gaze. We both learned the same lesson, he said. The world takes without asking. She met his eyes, refusing to flinch. Then we fight back, even if it breaks us. Something shifted in that silence. He had intended to keep her at arm's length, a worker in his machine, but for the first time in years, he let someone see the wound beneath the steel. She had intended to keep him as untouchable a man of ice and wealth, but for the first time, she saw the scarred human underneath. Neither spoke of it after that night, but both felt the invisible thread that had begun to weave between them. Elena entered the skyscraper each morning, feeling like an intruder in someone else's kingdom. The marble floors gleamed, the elevators whispered upward with silent efficiency, and the people who passed her wore suits that cost more than her entire monthly income. She carried her mother's prescriptions folded inside her bag, a constant reminder of why she had accepted this arrangement. Her first weeks were tests, subtle but sharp. Some colleagues dismissed her, others tried to corner her with menial work, assuming the girl from a bar would fold under pressure. She did not. She stayed late, studied documents until her eyes ached, asked questions no one expected her to ask, and found small mistakes buried in reports that saved the company thousands. Word spread. By the second month, the contempt lessened, replaced by reluctant respect. Damien rarely addressed her directly, beyond instructions, but she began to notice his presence everywhere. He walked the trading floor with the stride of a general, never raising his voice, yet bending the air around him. When he spoke, people listened. When he looked at her, it was never pity. It was scrutiny, evaluation, and sometimes something she could not define. One evening, as twilight painted the skyline in streaks of fire, she finished her tasks and found herself drawn again to the glass wall of his office. He sat alone, jacket draped over the chair, sleeves rolled to his forearms. His eyes were fixed on numbers scrolling across a monitor, but his body carried the weariness of a man who fought invisible wars. She stepped inside quietly. He did not glance up. "Most people fear you," she said, surprising even herself. "They say you have no heart." His eyes shifted to her, cold and sharp. "Do you believe them?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, I think you hide it because you lost too much." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then he leaned back, exhaling. "I was not born with this. I earned it. Every dollar, every building, every reputation. They call me cold because I chose survival over sentiment." Elena moved closer, her voice steady. "And did survival make you happy?" His jaw tightened. He looked past her toward the city that stretched endless and merciless. Happiness is a weakness. It distracts. It costs lives. She thought of her mother, gasping for breath, of Matteo pretending his stomach was full so she would eat. She thought of herself swallowing exhaustion, night after night. "Or maybe happiness is the only thing worth surviving for," she whispered. Something flickered in his expression, gone as quickly as it appeared. Yet from that night onward, a subtle shift lingered. He began to ask her opinion in meetings, sometimes only to challenge it, sometimes to use it. He passed by her desk more often than necessary, his gaze unreadable. She found herself watching him too. Not the billionaire in magazines, but the man who paused before elevators, as though remembering a different life. The man whose silence sometimes carried grief heavier than words. One night she found him again in that dark office, but this time he was not looking at numbers or photographs. He was simply staring into nothing, hands clasped as if holding something invisible. "Do you ever get tired of being strong?" she asked softly. His eyes closed for a second. "Every day." He opened them again and looked at her. "But no one cares if I am tired. They only care if I win." She stepped closer. "Then let me care, even if it changes nothing." His gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time the air between them burned with something neither could dismiss. She left before it deepened heart-pounding, but the thread between them tightened. Outside the tower, her life remained the same. She still returned to the cramped apartment, still cooked simple meals for Matteo, still held her mother's hand during coughing fits. But sometimes, late at night, she thought of Damien Cross staring into the dark and admitting he was tired. And sometimes he thought of Elena Marquez, the girl who had faced him without fear and said happiness was worth surviving for. Two worlds had collided, one built of marble and glass, the other of sweat and sacrifice. Neither belonged to the other, yet both were already changing. The calm did not last. Trouble rarely announced itself. In Damien's world, it slipped in through cracks left unattended. The three men who had cornered Elena that first night had not been random drunks. They were pawns pieces moved by someone who knew how to test defenses before striking at the king. Damien received the message one morning in his office, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph of Elena leaving her apartment with Matteo at her side, the words written in red ink beneath it. "You cannot protect them." His hand tightened around the paper until it creased. For years he had grown accustomed to threats against himself. Rivals tried, enemies whispered, but he had never allowed anyone close enough to matter. Now someone had found leverage. He summoned his security team, demanded full surveillance. But he knew instinctively this was not a simple threat. It bore the signature of Victor Hale. Once hailed as a rising star in finance, Victor had crashed spectacularly after Damien dismantled one of his fraudulent schemes. He had disappeared into the shadows, and now he was resurfacing with new allies. Word on the street named him connected to a violent syndicate hungry for money and revenge. Damien considered removing Elena from the city, but when he suggested it, she refused. "I cannot run every time someone tries to scare me," she said, her voice firm though her hands trembled. "Matteo has school. My mother needs doctors. This is our life." He stared at her, torn between fury at her defiance and admiration for her strength. That evening his fear proved justified. Matteo was walking home from school when a black van slowed beside him. Two men stepped out reaching for the boy, but a neighbor shouted, and Matteo darted into traffic, slipping through honking cars until he reached safety. By the time police arrived, the van was gone. Elena held her brother tightly, her heart pounding as he cried against her shoulder. When Damien appeared moments later, his jaw clenched and eyes like shards of ice, she realized he had known this was coming. "This will not happen again," he said, his voice low, lethal. He pulled every string at his disposal. Former street contacts, private investigators, quiet favors owed from men who now held power, but had once fought alongside him in alleys and deals. Information flowed, painting the picture he already suspected. Victor was planning something bigger, something meant not just to hurt, but to humiliate. Elena watched Damien transform. The billionaire mask slipped away, revealing a strategist born from survival. He mapped routes, analyzed patterns, anticipated strikes with precision that frightened her. Yet beneath the steel, she saw the flicker of something else. When he looked at Matteo sleeping on the couch, his eyes softened just slightly. When Elena confronted him late one night, asking why he cared so much when she was only a woman he barely knew, his answer left her silent. "Because I know what it is to lose everyone," he said, "and I will not watch it happen to you." That was the moment Elena realized Damien Cross was no longer just her reluctant savior. He was becoming her shield, whether she asked for it or not. The night of the charity gala arrived wrapped in glitter and menace. The ballroom of the Waldorf shimmered with chandeliers, gowns, and tuxedos, a palace of glass and gold where the city's most powerful gathered to congratulate themselves. Elena had never seen anything like it, the ceiling painted with constellations, the air heavy with perfume and money. She wore a simple dress. Damien had insisted she accept dark blue that fit her curves, yet carried modest elegance. Matteo clung to her hand, his eyes wide with awe at the sight of tables groaning with desserts. While her mother remained at home, under the watch of a nurse Damien had quietly arranged. Damien himself moved among the crowd with practiced control, shaking hands, offering sharp smiles that never reached his eyes. To anyone watching, he was the cold billionaire, entertaining his peers. But Elena knew better. She saw the way. His gaze constantly swept exits, the subtle gestures to his men. Stationed at corners, the way his shoulders never fully relaxed. She stayed close, though he had told her to enjoy herself. Something in her bones whispered danger. The first crack appeared when the lights flickered, only for a heartbeat, but enough for glasses to tremble and conversations to pause. Musicians faltered, then resumed the incident, dismissed as a technical fault. Damien's jaw tightened. He leaned toward Elena. "Stay with Matteo. Do not move unless I tell you." She nodded, fear rising. Moments later, the air shifted. Men in waitstaff uniforms spread through the crowd, their movements too precise, their eyes too alert. Then chaos erupted. One drew a gun and fired into the ceiling. Shouts and screams breaking like waves. Guests ducked beneath tables' heels, snapping against marble. Another man seized Elena from behind, pressing cold steel against her temple. Matteo screamed but was shoved aside. Elena gasped, terror flooding her chest, but she fought to stay calm, her eyes locking on Damien across the room. He stood motionless, fury burning beneath his icy control. The leader emerged then. Victor Hale, once polished, now scarred by years in shadows, his smile twisted. Damien Cross, he called, voice booming above the panic. The king who thought himself untouchable. Look at you now. He yanked Elena forward, displaying her like a trophy. You took everything from me. Tonight, I take something from you. Damien stepped forward slowly, his hands raised, his voice steady. Let her go, Victor. This is between you and me. Victor laughed. You always did think you could dictate terms. Not tonight. His men closed ranks, guns sweeping the crowd. Damien's eyes flicked to Elena. She saw it, the unspoken message, hold on, I am coming. Then he moved. In a blur, Damien slammed a chair into the nearest gunman, twisting the weapon free before the man could react. He fired once, striking the chandelier above showering glass, and plunging half the room into darkness. Screams rose again, chaos now complete. Elena struggled, kicking at her captor. He cursed and tightened his grip, but she slammed her heel against his shin enough to loosen his hold. She ducked, rolling free, just as Damien reached her. He pulled her behind him, his body a shield. Victor roared, drawing his own gun, but Damien hurled the captured weapon across the room, striking his wrist and sending the shot wide. Then it became a storm. Damien fought not with elegance, but with raw precision, every motion efficient born of survival. He used tables as barricades, wine bottles as missiles, turning luxury into weapons. 2 men went down hard groaning on polished floors. Elena grabbed a fallen tray, swinging it with desperate strength against another attacker, surprising herself when he crumpled. Fear became fire inside her. She would not be helpless. She would not let them take her again. But the fight was brutal. Damien caught a blow to his side, grimacing as pain shot through him. Blood spread across his shirt, but he pushed forward, eyes locked on Victor. The room smelled of smoke, spilled wine, and fear. Guests fled through side doors as alarms blared. Victor and Damien faced each other across the wreckage, one grinning with madness, the other steady, despite blood dripping from his knuckles. "You destroyed me," Victor spat. "My empire, my name, everything I built. You crushed it like it was nothing." Damien's chest rose and fell, his voice cutting through the din. "You destroyed yourself. I only revealed it." With a snarl, Victor lunged, swinging the butt of his gun. Damien met him head-on, fists, colliding bodies crashing into tables that splintered beneath their weight. The 2 men traded blows, brutal and relentless. Elena watched in horror and awe, her hands clutching Matteo, who had crawled back to her side, eyes wide with terror. At the edge of her vision, she saw Victor draw a hidden knife blade flashing. "Damien," she screamed. He twisted at the last second, the blade grazing his arm instead of his throat. Pain seared him, but he used the momentum, slamming Victor into the floor. The knife skittered away, yet Victor was not finished. He grabbed his gun again, aiming straight for Damien's chest. The world slowed. Elena's heart froze. Matteo, desperate, shouted from behind her, his voice piercing the chaos. "Leave him alone." The distraction was enough. Damien seized Victor's wrist, twisting with a snap that sent the gun spinning. He followed with a strike that sent Victor sprawling, unconscious, sprawled in broken glass. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breaths of those left standing. Damien staggered, blood on his hands, but his eyes sought Elena first. She ran to him, Matteo at her side. Her arms wrapped around him, as if she could hold him upright by will alone. For the first time, he let himself lean into someone, his breath warm against her hair. Sirens wailed outside, red and blue lights flashing through shattered windows. Security stormed in, police shouting orders, but Elena heard none of it. All she felt was Damien's heartbeat beneath her palms, steady, alive. The cold billionaire had bled for her, fought for her, chosen her above everything. And she knew then that nothing in her world would ever be the same. The aftermath of the gala was chaos wrapped in flashing lights and whispered rumors. Police swarmed the ballroom, guests stumbled out in tears, clutching pearls and champagne-stained jackets, and the city outside roared with speculation. Victor Hale was dragged away, in handcuffs, his empire of shadows collapsing under the weight of his failure. Yet for Damien, the battle was not measured in arrests or headlines. It was measured in the weight of Elena's arms around him, in the wide eyes of Matteo, staring up at him with trust that pierced deeper than any wound. Doctors insisted on treating his injuries, but he refused hospitals, choosing instead the quiet of his penthouse where Elena and Matteo followed him. There in rooms designed for isolation, the presence of their laughter and voices felt like sunlight cracking through stone. Elena cleaned the gash on his arm with trembling hands, her touch gentle despite her own exhaustion. He watched her eyes dark but softened. "You could have been killed," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why risk everything for me?" Damien's answer came without hesitation. "Because I already know what it feels like to lose everything. I will not feel it again." She pressed the bandage, tight tears falling onto his skin, and in that moment, the walls he had built for years began to crumble. Days passed, investigations spread, and the media painted Damien as both ruthless savior and controversial hero. For once, he did not care. He spent mornings with Matteo at the breakfast table, pretending to read financial reports, while secretly listening to the boys' endless stories about school and soccer. He spent evenings with Elena walking through the park as she spoke of dreams she had buried beneath survival. The cold billionaire was learning warmth slowly, awkwardly, but with sincerity. One night on the balcony overlooking the city, lights, Elena turned to him. "You do not have to keep us here. We can go back to our lives. We do not belong in your world." He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "You belong exactly where I am. Because without you, this world means nothing." She felt the truth in his words, and the fear she carried of their differences melted into something stronger. Their kiss was quiet, hesitant at first, then deepened with the certainty of two souls who had fought too long alone. Healing did not come all at once. His nightmares still woke him. Some nights sweat on his skin as he remembered Isabel's death. Elena still struggled with guilt, still feared the bills that once haunted her, still worried she was not enough for a man like him. But together they began to replace those wounds with something new. Damien created a fund in her mother's name, ensuring care would never be an issue again. Elena brought warmth into his sterile penthouse laughter and simple meals, transforming it into a home. Matteo filled the silence with energy. Damien had forgotten life could hold, and in return, Damien became the father figure the boy had lost. Months later, at a small dinner in their apartment, Elena looked across the table and whispered the words she had once thought impossible. "I finally feel safe." Damien reached for her hand, his expression tender. "And I finally feel alive." The man once known only as the cold billionaire had discovered that true wealth was not measured in empires or power, but in the fragile, precious bond of love and family. He had fought in alleys and boardrooms. He had bled in ballrooms. But the greatest victory he carried was the one sitting before him, a woman who healed his heart, a boy who trusted him, and a home that no longer felt empty. The city outside kept moving, indifferent and relentless, but within those walls Damien Cross had found what he never thought possible. He had found warmth, belonging, and love.